Good morning. I'm glad to see all of you here, and I'm glad to have all of those who've joined us remotely. The theme for this month is belonging. I have done something a little bit different with my sermon today. It's written in 3 sections that I'm calling Acts 1, 2, and 3. Each draws on a different principle, and all 3 hopefully connect together. Act 1, the need and dream of belonging. The 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Reverend Margot spoke a few weeks ago about the importance of belonging. She shared studies that show if you are isolated, the negative impact on your health is worse than things like smoking and high blood pressure. I don't think it takes much to feel how true this is. Especially early in the COVID pandemic, many of us struggled with the isolation that came with quarantine, fear of the unknown, shifting to online work and school. Being disconnected from the web of existence is an unnatural state, and a painful one at that. As humans, we crave belonging on a deep level. Even if we're the kind of person who claims to hate people, we still have a need to belong, perhaps with other people haters. The human condition is one of belonging. We simply cannot thrive unless we are in relationship. So on the one hand, we have this deep desire for belonging, one that lives at a cellular and spiritual level, a desire that knows we are all connected. And yet, on the other hand, we live in a culture that wants to divide us. John A. Powell, when talking about belonging, said, "Through slavery and the Enlightenment, the United States has become extremely attached to the notion of individuality and independence. Individuality, as we think of it, is actually extremely problematic and has led to a culture of isolation and domination that is not sustainable or desirable. Indeed, we are running into the limits of our ability to convince ourselves that it is desirable. There are so many expressions that help us see it. And some people talk about we need to do things to connect. And on one hand, that's right. But on the other hand, it understates what it is. We are connected. What we need to do is to become aware of it, to live it, and to express it. So what are we seeking when we seek to belong? A confirmation that the truth that we are all connected. A place where we feel safe and nurtured. A community of support and celebration. A beloved community where we will be loved. And so where does this longing for belonging take us? In the story for all ages this morning, we heard and saw an idea of belonging, where there is an umbrella that is big enough to fit everyone, no matter how tall or hairy. It is a beautiful concept. And many of us do work in various ways to realize what belonging can look like. We work for justice and support the marginalized. But I feel like often we talk about what we want to have, what could be, like the giant umbrella. A world where everyone is welcome without having to cut out any parts of who they are so that they can belong. We dream of communities of ease, where we can show up and feel free. And these images we come up with don't include conflict or struggle. Reading The Big Umbrella and thinking about the ways in which we imagine what belonging looks and feels like, it started to feel uncomfortably familiar to other ways that we imagine relationships. I will be the first to admit I love a romantic comedy. I read most nights before I go to bed or listen to an audiobook. Brian often jokes that all of them have the same basic plot line. Girl has a big upheaval in her life, a breakup or getting fired, and coincidentally some long-lost relative happens to have died and left her a bookshop, or cafe, or knitting store, or bed and breakfast, or ice cream shop. And when our main character arrives to the quaint town of her deceased relative, she bumps into the grumpy and stoic handsome man next door. And in the process of helping her fix up whatever property she's been left, he goes from grumpy and stoic to kind and generous. And in the end, they fall in love. And that's where it ends. That's where it always ends. Whether it's a book or a movie, our culture's stories of love almost always end at the peak of falling in love, the I do moment, the assumption being they live happily ever after. And I wonder if we are also thinking about belonging and beloved community like that as well. The beautiful promised land where everyone gets along and doesn't have to hide any part of who they are. I'm not knocking that fantasy. I think it's important to envision how we would like the world to be. But I worry that when we look to those utopian ideas with rose-colored glasses, we glaze over the fact that we are still human. Perhaps more evolved humans, but still human. Act 2, the work of love, the second principle: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Humans make mistakes. We get defensive, we get angry, we don't always get along. And most humans I know, myself included, don't love conflict. And so perhaps it makes sense that our ideas of happily ever after are ones of ease and comfort. We follow our desire for belonging by seeking out groups where we fit in, where people are like us and like us. But how long does it take to become disillusioned? With family, a community, a church, a political movement, a neighborhood, a school, because something isn't perfect. Do our community relationships parallel our romantic relationships? I sure think they can. Because in both, we can create unrealistic ideas of what they could be like, and because in both circumstances, we are seeking for love and connection. There is an idea in the world that love should be easy. Think about this quote from Alain de Botton, the founder and chairman of the School of Life. The governing assumption in a relationship is, the person should know what's in my mind, ideally without me needing to tell them. If I need to spell it out to you, you don't love me. When people always say communicate, we have to be generous towards the reasons why we don't. We don't because we're operating with this mad idea that true love means intuitive understanding. And I go bananas when people say things like, I met someone. The loveliest thing is they understood me without me having to speak. If you expect that your lover must understand everything about you, you will be furious pretty much all of the time. This idea of romantic love, while being entertaining for a movie night or casual bedtime reading, does not serve us. It does not serve us in seeking intimate relationships, and it does not serve us in creating beloved community and places of belonging. So let's consider some other ideas of what love could be. The ancient Greeks had a view of love which was essentially based around education. That love is a benevolent process whereby two people teach each other how to become better versions of themselves. This might seem to fly in the face of idealized romantic love, in which the biggest insult one can receive is their partner wanting to change them. But instead of freezing their loved one in one place for all eternity, ancient Greeks were committed to increasing the admirable characteristics that they possess and the other person possesses. Bell Hooks is quoted as saying, "Love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust." And de Botton says, "By love I mean the capacity to enter imaginatively into the minds of the people with whom you don't immediately agree, and to look for the more charitable explanations for the behavior which doesn't appeal to you, which could seem plain wrong, and to not chuck them immediately into prison or hold them up in front of a court of law, or just tell them how stupid they are." Well, I think all three of these are better definitions for love, and ones that can be helpful creating communities of belonging. I want to consider more closely what de Botton is saying. In his conversation with Krista Tippett in an episode of On Being, he uses this example. If a child says, "I hate you," you immediately go, "Okay, that's not quite true. Probably they're tired, or they're hungry, something's gone wrong, their tooth hurts, something." We're looking around for a benevolent interpretation that can just shave off some of the more depressing and dispiriting aspects of their behavior. And we do this naturally with children. And yet we do it so seldom with adults. When an adult meets an adult and they say, "I've not had a good day, leave me alone," rather than saying, "Okay, I'm just going to go behind the facade of this slightly depressing comment and understand that it's not actually about me. It's about what's going on inside of them today." We don't do that. We take it all personally. And so I think the work of love is to try, when we can manage it, we can't always, but to go behind the front of these rather depressing or challenging behaviors and try to look at where they might have come from. He goes on to say, love is doing the work to ask oneself, where is this rather aggressive, pained, non-communicative, unpleasant behavior coming from? If we can do that, we're on the road to knowing a little bit about what love really is. The title of this sermon is What We Give Each Other. I had originally thought of calling it What We Owe Each Other. I shied away from using the word owe. It can be a hard word, the idea that we owe anyone anything. I think about it being used in unfair systems. Being nice to someone on a date means they owe you a kiss or more. But I think I might be coming around to it when talking about belonging. Some of the places and groups to which we belong have explicit statements, like a covenant, that outlines what we owe to each other and what the collective owes to us. If we make a commitment, perhaps we do have a reciprocal owing of certain things. In the quest for belonging, we must be committed to the work of love. Act 3, the goodness of people. First principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people. You might be thinking, oh my goodness, all of this stuff about how we communicate with each other makes a lot of sense, and so does finding new definitions for love. But it doesn't sound easy. It sounds like it would take a lot of trust and vulnerability, and that's scary. There is an age-old theological question. Are people inherently good or inherently bad? I grew up believing that humans are inherently good. I was lucky and privileged to grow up in a household free of physical violence. The community I grew up in was affluent and had a low crime rate. My whiteness protected me from the pain and oppression that other people felt. It wasn't that much of a stretch for me to believe that people are good. I did have times in my life where I questioned this, as I grew up and saw more of the world. But my spiritual life was grounded in this belief of goodness. So that is what I always return to. And then COVID happened. And the foundation of my belief systems were shaken. The news was filled with stories of people not caring for each other. The narrative was one of the depravity of humanity. And I dealt with it on a personal level, working in the hospital facing anti-maskers and COVID deniers. I felt myself slipping and wondering if, when the proverbial poop hits the fan, if we do all care about each other. The narrative of the depravity of humanity is not unique to COVID. Author Rebecca Solnit studies and writes about things like hope, meaning, love, and also disasters. Solnit says, one of the biggest cliches about disasters is that they reveal civilization as a thin veneer beneath which lies brutal human nature. From this perspective, the best we can hope for most people under crisis is selfish indifference, and at worst, they will swiftly turn to violence. Our worst instincts must be repressed, and this becomes a justification for authoritarianism and heavy-handed policing. But studies of historical disasters have shown this is not how most people actually behave. There are nearly always selfish and destructive people, and they are often in power because we have created a system that rewards this kind of personality and those principles. But the majority of ordinary people in disasters behave in ways that are anything but selfish. And if we're stuck with veneer as a metaphor, then it peels off to reveal a lot of creative and generous altruism and brilliant grassroots organizing. Dorothy Day was an American journalist turned social activist. Along with Peter Marin, she founded the Catholic Worker Movement. She became known for her social justice campaigns in defense of the poor, the hungry, and the unhoused. Day was 5 years old at the time of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Years later, in her diary, Day wrote, "What I remember most plainly about the earthquake was the human warmth and kindliness of everyone afterward. For days, refugees poured out of burning San Francisco and camped in Adora Park and the racetrack in Oakland. People came in their night clothes. There were newborn babies. Mother and all our neighbors were busy from morning to night cooking hot meals. They gave away every extra garment they possessed. They stripped themselves to the bone in giving, forgetful of tomorrow. While crisis lasted, people loved each other." Why can't it be this way all the time, Dorothy wonders. From then on, she would try to recapture the sense of real and spontaneous community she felt then, and would strive to reform the world around her as to make such community possible. It was while researching this for the 100th anniversary of the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco that Solnit started to think about this aspect of humanity that Day had seen as a child. Solnit says, "I found Day's story corresponded to my own experience of the 1989 earthquake. That there had been not only an extraordinary upwelling of ordinary people reaching out to do what was needed, and to do what needed to be done to take care of each other. And in that, an incredible sense of joy and power and connection I realized it was missing in everyday life." And so I looked back over the past almost 3 years with this lens, and I started to see what Day and Solnit talked about. Yes, there were selfish and destructive people, but there were so many more generous and loving ones. The rise of mutual aid groups, people sharing music and art and dance online during the lockdown, volunteers bringing food to people who could not leave their homes, home sewists turned production worker cranking out fabric masks. I even remember reading an article about an assisted living facility that had created a plastic sheet with sleeves that allowed loved ones to hug each other safely before the vaccine. Solnit returns to the question, Why has everything we've ever been told about human nature misled us about what happens in these moments? And what happens if we acknowledge, as I think people in the kind of work as neuropsychologists and the Dalai Lama's research projects, and even economists are beginning to say, what if everything we've been told about human nature is wrong, and we're actually very generous, communitarian, altruistic beings who are distorted by the system we're in and not made happy by? What if we can be better people in a better world? There is so much work love has to do in this world. We have a longing to belong, one which comes from deep in our being, a longing that knows we are all already connected, whether we feel it or not. So let's change our stories about what love means. Let's let go of the fairy tale ideas of love and belonging where we all just get along and read each other's minds. Let's challenge stories that say humanity is selfish and depraved. Let's approach one another with gentleness and curiosity, going deeper than the surface. If we are to continue the work of love, the work of sustainable belonging, that is what we must give to each other. We owe each other that much.